A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajeem. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. All praise is indeed due to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the creator of the universe, our benefactor, our nurturer, the one who placed us in this universe at this precise time in order to test us as to how we would follow the footsteps of our beloved Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the fountain of our knowledge, the source of our Islam. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah to you all. You've already had the life story and works of two of the great founders of the Islamic juristic schools, Imam Abu Hanifa and Imam Malik. May Allah reward them both. And this is the story of Imam Shaf'i, rahmatullahi alayhi. And I think the way I'm going to approach it is I'm going to give you a brief account of their life story and then lessons learned, because there's no point in delving into a story of someone without learning what lessons we can bring from their history for us to bear today. His name was Muhammad ibn Idris al-Shaf'i, and he was born actually in Palestine, in Gaza, or Gaza, as we know, the Gaza Strip. And he was born in the year 150 after Hijri, which is about 767 in the Common Era, AD. So that's about 1300 years ago. Okay, is that right? His lineage, and lineage is important to some people and not important to others, but it's interesting historically for us, is that he could trace his family back through his father, through to the Quraysh line of Abd Manaf. And if you remember, Abd Manaf, his son was Ibn al-Muttalib, and his son Ibn Hashim, and then from him Ibn Hashim was the grandfather of the Prophet ﷺ. So Banu Hashim and Banu Muttalib. So he traces his family line to the family of the Prophet ﷺ, but before the Prophet ﷺ. His mother was Yemeni, and what's interesting for us to know is that his father died when he was very, very young, and he was in a state of extreme poverty, he and his mother. Very little money, very little food, etc., to fend for themselves. And it was in this state that his mother decided to send him to Makkah, because that's where she felt his Qurayshi roots were, to relatives in Makkah, and then she would then join him at a later age. And there's a dispute about what time exactly he went to Makkah. Probably, maybe some say as early as 2 years old up to about 6 years old. Now what's interesting also is to put into perspective the history, the climate of that time. We're talking about 150 years after Hijri. It's an interesting year, that year. It's the same year that Imam Abu Hanifa passed away. It's the same year Imam Shaf'i was born. The two never met. It is the year maybe about 7 years, 8 years after the Umayyads have come to power. Sorry, the Abbasids have come to power. If you remember, and this is very important to understand how we arrive at these juristic schools, these madhabs, because the Prophet's companions, they left the Hijaz into various armies. They went into Persia, as we know. They attacked Byzantium at the time, repelled their attacks. They took Egypt and then went across the North African border. So they spread. And as they spread, different companions were located in different parts of the world. Now, why is that important? It's important because we know from even during the time while the Prophet ﷺ was alive, we know the Sahaba were different people. We know that Abdullah ibn Abbas radiallahu anhu was different to Abdullah ibn Umar radiallahu anhu, was different to Abdullah ibn Masud. And I don't mean just different in the sense of different personalities. I mean different ways of how they perceived the Quran and Hadith, how they understood the different messages of the Prophet ﷺ. These were great Sahaba, but they settled in different parts of the world by accident or by design, and we believe in the qadr of Allah. And so around these Sahaba began the Tabi'een, the next generation who's studied with these Sahaba in different parts of the world. So you have now the Iraqi school. The Iraqi school around Abdullah ibn Masud radhiyallahu anhu. And from the Iraqi school we have, of course, Imam Abu Hanifa. And we have in the Meccan period the people who surrounded in the Hijaz, Mecca and Medina. We have Abdullah ibn Abbas and Abdullah ibn Umar radhiyallahu anhu. And around them, the people, different people, the Malikis in Medina, which is the story I think we covered last week. So now we come to Imam Shaf'i. So you've got to understand that these are different, slightly different ways of looking at things. And this is natural phenomenon that had happened at that time. Remember, there is no Bukhari, there is no Muslim, there is no Tirmidhi, or, there's no books of hadith, apart from probably the most famous is the Muwatta of Imam Malik. But otherwise there's no collections and there's no science of hadith yet at the moment. This is still very early days. In fact, the time that Imam Shaf'i passes away is the time when Imam Bukhari is beginning. So it's quite important to realize that. Now, without hadith, without access to a huge number of hadith, you say, well, actually there's no hadith on this matter, so what's the best we can reason? So there's a wide range of opinions around in different matters. Okay, the Abbasids took over the Umayyads and actually wiped them out as much as they could. So it was a bloodbath when they trampled in Damascus and took over. And of course, one of the princes of the Umayyads, he fled, as we know, spent 4 years trying to hide himself through the Middle East because he and his family were in mortal danger. And he managed to find his way to Spain, and of course then we have the brilliant Umayyad dynasty in Spain right up to the Middle Ages. But the Abbasids have now come to power, and they now rule, and they will rule the world for the next, 600-700 years, the Muslim world at that time. And it's during the third or fourth Khalifa, Abbasid Khalifa's time, that, during the second Khalifa's time that Imam Shaf'i is born, Al-Mansur, and it's during his grandson's time, Harun Rashid's time, where Imam Shaf'i comes to the fore. So there he is, he's in Makkah. He's been sent there as a young child. What's now important, and how old are you, Zubair? 10. Alhamdulillah, mashallah. Imam Shaf'i was a child prodigy. At the age of 7, he had completed hifz. So if you imagine that how imbued he is with the language, with the desire to learn. Age of 7, he's completed hifz of the Quran. By the age of 10, he'd completed hifz of the only hadith book really available, Muwatta of Imam Malik. That's quite a phenomenon. He is now in Makkah, he's studying among the scholars. He's a young child, but he's studying among the scholars in Makkah. Makkah is a place, of course, of big scholars because they all come there for Umrah and for Hajj. And he's learning of them. And we know, for example, he can't afford much. So he's living under patronage of different scholars. And one story is related that he goes to the governor's house in Makkah and he waits for the secretary to throw out whatever they've written on. So you can turn the pages over. Of course, they didn't have paper, but whatever they had, turn it over, and wherever there was gaps, he could write on it because he couldn't afford writing material. What's also interesting is he himself recognized that although he is Qurayshi, although he's in Makkah, although he's done all this hifz, he recognizes that he is lacking, he feels himself lacking in the pristine Arabic Qurayshi dialect much more. He wants to concentrate on much more. So he then, with the permission of his mother, goes off with a tribe of Bedouins, really, the Hudayl tribe, and he spends quite a long time with them, learning the poetry and improving his language, his pronunciation, his poetry, etc. So now he comes back to Makkah, studies more under the teachers there, and we have Muslim ibn Khalid az-Zinji, who died at 180 after Hijri, who was the Mufti of Makkah, and he actually says to the 19-year-old Imam Shaf'i, he says, "You are now qualified to give fatwa." So 19 years old, and as far as the Mufti of Makkah is concerned, he's capable of giving fatwa. He's a Mufti in his own right. And that's a phenomenal achievement if you think about what people you know and scholars you've come across, etc. But what's interesting is that Imam Shaf'i doesn't do that. He himself doesn't think that he wants to learn more. His hunger for knowledge is more. And he recognizes at this time that the expert on juristic thinking as well as hadith, combining both, is of course Imam Malik. So he wants to now go to Medina and start on his second stage, if you like, of learning more. But how do you go to Medina? How do you get into the circle of Imam Malik? So the Mufti of Makkah suggests and writes a letter to the governor of Makkah. The governor of Makkah then writes a letter to the governor of Medina. And the young 19, 20-year-old Imam Shaf'i sets off from Medina, clutching this letter to the governor of Medina. And the letter to the governor of Medina says, "Please take this to Imam Malik and say to Imam Malik on behalf of the governor of Makkah that this young man is indeed unique. And he can, please, if he can benefit from the tutorship of Imam Malik." So Governor, and again this is written in the biography of Imam Shaf'i, Imam Razi, who writes a nice biography of Imam Shaf'i. He writes that the governor of Medina, when he saw the letter, became quite afraid. He said, "I can't take this to Imam Malik." But he goes with Imam Shaf'i to Imam Malik's house, and the governor of Medina knocks on the door of Imam Malik's house, and Imam Malik's secretary answers the door, and he says, "Well, just wait 1 minute, I'll go ask the master if he's available." It's the governor of Medina. So he goes, and he comes back to the governor of Medina, and he says, "My master says that if it is a question on Islam you want an answer to, please put it in writing, and he will get back to you later on in the week with the answer. And if it is hadith you want to learn, then I do hadith studies on Thursdays and Saturdays, and he can come back to the study in the class." So the governor of Medina says, "Could you please say to him, it's urgent, it's a letter from the governor of Makkah." And he said, so in the end Imam Malik comes out, listens, takes the letter, and then he says something very interesting. He says, "Is this what we have become? Is this what our religion has become? That you need to bribe me to take a student? I.e. a letter of commendation has to come in order to take a student." So he listens to Imam Shaf'i and he recognizes very quickly that this young man is unique. So he says, "Come tomorrow morning and start with me." And what's interesting, Imam Shaf'i, you can spend 2-3 years and say, "I studied under such and such." He doesn't do that, Imam Shaf'i. He actually spends the rest of his life with Imam Malik until Imam Malik passes away. So he can't get enough of him. 9 years he spends with him. 9 years in Medina. And he goes to the Muwatta, the book of hadith that Imam Malik had completed, goes through it in detail, and then he starts sitting in with Imam Malik when he's giving answers to different questions and so on. What's also interesting, and I find fascinating, because I love this period of Islam, is that in the last 3 years of Imam Shafi's sitting and learning as a student to Imam Malik, in the last 3 years of his 9 years, another student arrives who also wants to learn from Imam Malik. Imam Malik, by the way, is about 70 to 80 years old by this time. And this other student is a big scholar who's just arrived from Iraq, and that's Muhammad ibn al-Hasan al-Shaybani, who is one of the foremost, if not the foremost students of Imam Abu Hanifa, who's just arrived, because remember, Imam Abu Hanifa has passed away many years ago, 20 years ago, and he's just arrived from Iraq to study with Imam Malik. And that's fascinating. I'll tell you why I find that fascinating, because the Iraqi school were given this loose sort of term, Ahl Rai, the people of thought, if you like, the people who use logic. And the people of the Hijaz, the Medinan people, the Malikis, were known as Ahl Hadith, people of Hadith, people of tradition. The two never saw eye to eye. The Hijazi scholars, the Malikis, used to say to the Hanafis, you just use aql. And aql is nothing. One person's aql is different to another person's aql. And the the Iraqi school, the Hanafis, used to say to the Malikis, you just use naql. You just listen and repeat like parrots. At least we think. And there's quite a competitive, if you like, healthy rivalry. Despite that, Imam Shaybani has come to learn from Imam Malik himself. And that's the beauty. You're not scared to learn of each other and have that respect for each other. Very, very powerful. You don't find that much today. You don't find someone who disagrees with somebody else. You don't find an Ali Hadith scholar saying, there's a big Brailwi scholar coming, I'm going to learn from him, and vice versa. Don't get that kind of cross-fertilization of knowledge. So there he is, and Imam Malik now passes away 9 years into Imam Shafi's study with him. Imam Shafi now goes back to Makkah. He's now a young man, about 28 years old. And in Makkah, he's trying to find himself. What shall he do? What's next? And a lot of people have great respect for him now, because he's become quite famous in his own right, even as a 28-year-old. Into Makkah, as part of the pilgrimage, arrives the governor of Yemen, and he hears this young man, and he's just blown away. So he persuades Imam Shafi, please come back with me, and I want to appoint you as a qadi, as a judge, in one of my towns. Imam Shafi, thinking, well, there's nothing else at the moment he can think of, what else, and why not allow him time to further his study as well, goes with him, and now he enters what they call the Yemeni stage of Imam Shafi. Now, it's also interesting at this stage to see how many scholars he'd studied under. And Imam Razi writes, many years, centuries later, Fakhruddin Razi, he writes that he studied under 19 scholars altogether. 5 in Makkah and 6 in Medina, 4 in Yemen that were about to come, and 4 in Iraq, which we're going to explain later. But in Makkah, he studies under Sufyan ibn Uyayna, Hadith, a big Hadith master, and he studies under Waqi ibn al-Jarrah, etc. So he's well imbued with Hadith as well as with Fiqh. So now in Yemen, he's a Qadi. His area district is Najran. He stays there for 5 years. He's well known for his honesty. And there's a hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, which is a very important hadith. I'm trying to remember the words of it actually. In paraphrased term, it says, woe to him, the Qadi, who sells his judgment for a miserable price. So the Prophet has been focusing on the Qadi, and actually in another narration, the ruler, because these two people hold power. And what the Prophet ﷺ is saying, may Allah help the judge who takes a bribe, because because he's done something absolutely terrible in Islam. The judge and the ruler. And Imam Shaf'i, he knows this. He is scrupulously honest as a judge. And this, of course, is now going to bring him at odds with the rulership. And that's exactly what happens. In a few wheeling and dealings, the governor of Yemen, who's now a different governor, wants to do something tricky or dodgy and comes smack up against the Qadi. And the Qadi refuses to budge. He will not accept a bribe. And in one famous showdown, Imam Shaf'i stands up and he actually makes a statement against the governor. That this is not good, it's not good what is happening here and so on. The governor is absolutely incensed, angry. So he writes a letter to Harun al-Rashid, the Khalifa in Baghdad. In this letter, of course, this is the Abbasids. The Abbasids came to power by joining factions of different rebels, joining them up, quickly doing a coup, and then smashing all of them. Yeah, so they're using the different rebellious people, came to power, and then you get rid of them. Because then you can stay in power as long as you can, and any slight rebellion there is, you smash it. And the biggest rebellion for both the Umayyads and the Abbasids for a long time were the supporters of Imam Ali and their descendants, the household of the Prophet ﷺ. And so the governor of Yemen writes a letter to Harun al-Rashid saying, Imam Shaf'i is beginning a rebellion. He's supporting the household of the Prophet ﷺ, the Alawis, not the Alawis of today, the Alawis, or the known as Alawis at that time. And this can be very serious for us. So Harun al-Rashid orders him to be dragged to Baghdad in chains. So the Qadi of Najran, that's why a dangerous position to be a Qadi. You're in favor one day and you're not in favor the other day. And so he arrives into the court of Harun al-Rashid, the Khalifa in Baghdad, in chains. And by coincidence, the day he arrives in the court, in that court is Imam al-Shaybani. Because Imam Shaybani, he is the Chief Justice of Harun al-Rashid's Khilafah at that time in Baghdad. So when he arrives, of course they know each other because they studied together for 3 years under Imam Malik. And the Khalifa asks Imam Shaf'i, what do you have to say for yourself? Imam Shaf'i defends himself, speaks the truth. Harun al-Rashid realizes actually there isn't really anything here. And then Imam al-Shaybani speaks in favor of Imam Shaf'i. And so Harun al-Rashid decides, he says, right. He turns to his Chief Justice, Imam al-Shaybani, and he says, you take him home. He's free to go with you. You take him home, keep him at home, and I will decide the matter later. Meaning, of course, he was never going to decide on the matter, but it was one way of removing him from the court, and at least the people, the governor of Yemen and everybody else would be happy that he's dealt with him, he's away from Yemen. And so now we enter into Imam Shafi's Baghdad stage, and this is very important for him, because Baghdad is the capital of the Muslim Empire at that time. This is the house of wisdom, began all the scholars gathering in Baghdad to go through various different sciences and so on. And into this field arrives this young man, Imam al-Shafi'i, staying at the house of Imam al-Shaybani with his immense library. And he starts reading. And he starts discussing and debating. And very, very quickly, he gathers all the different knowledges he can from the Iraqi school of thought. Already an expert of the Maliki school of thought, he now makes himself imbued with the Hanafi school of thought in Iraq. So 2 years he spends in Baghdad, taking that knowledge from the Iraqi scholars. 2 years. He memorizes all the hadith that Iraq had to offer him, learns all that, and then he now leaves back for Makkah. And now we come to the Imam Shaf'i that we know. Because up till this time, as far as he's concerned, he's been taking, absorbing, learning, sifting, and he is unique in one sense. He's taken the Maliki thought and he's taken the Hanafi thought. He's taken the two strands and now he starts weighing them up in his own mind, and out comes the products that we know him for. In Makkah, in his third stage, he now spends 9 years here teaching his way of looking at things. And here he meets Ahmad ibn Hanbal, who's a young man, younger than him, and they have a few debates. And so it's interesting. So Imam Shaf'i, Imam Malik, and Imam Ahmad, and you'll cover Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal next week, these three were near each other. But Imam Abu Hanifa had passed away before them. So there they are. He starts now writing 2 books he writes which are very important. He writes Khilaf Malik, my disagreements or points of difference between me and Malik. And he writes Khilaf Iraqiyin, my points of difference with the Iraqi school, i.e. the Hanafis. And so these 2 books become more and more known. He then goes back to Baghdad after 9 years of teaching, just to share with people there what he's done so far. Bounce ideas. You know, when you come up with a new thing, best thing, go to scholars, say, this is what I believe, what do you think? This is what I believe, what do you think? And he finds a willing audience in Baghdad and a really rich atmosphere. And there in Baghdad, he writes his masterpiece. And this is a true masterpiece. No book had been written like this, which went through the exact science of Islamic law. So one big scholar asked him that it all depends where I go to get what fatwa. If I go to the Syrians under Ozai, I get a different fatwa. If I go to the Hijazi scholars, I get a different fatwa. If I go to the Iraqi scholars, I get a different fatwa. How is this possible when we have one religion? So they'd asked him, oh young scholar, because they were older, can you not write a book which can go through the correct science of using Quran and Hadith to come up with law? How to distinguish between Naskh and Mansukh, abrogated and that which is abrogating. How we distinguish between Al-Am, Umum, the general, and the Khas, the Takhsis, the narrowing. Because some verses are Am, some are specific. How do we tell which verse is specific for a particular people and which verse isn't? Which word is and which word isn't? Can you write a book on this science? And so he wrote this book. And it's a masterpiece. This was the first book in the Muslim world on a science we call now Usul al-Fiqh. So this is not fiqh. This is how to create fiqh. What are the rules and theories behind which how we weigh up Islamic sources to come up with an opinion? It's a very, very big science. When I had the good fortune of meeting Sheikh Abdullah al-Judayah in 1997, and we asked him, could he teach us? And he said, okay, what would you like to be taught? And straight away our first thing was Usul al-Fiqh. Teach us Usul al-Fiqh. Because we saw Usul al-Fiqh is the key that opens the lock to understanding Islamic sciences. And we spent 8 years on his book on Usul al-Fiqh. 8 years. Because it is such a rich science. And this is the first ever book in the world written on it. And he wrote this. He actually, when he wrote it and he sent it off to a few scholars to look at, he then revised it, and then he revised it, and he revised it, so that by the time of his death, many years later, he'd revised this, in his words, 400 times. And they said to him, why? Isn't it perfect? Couldn't you get it right first time? They were mocking him. And he said, only Allah's book is perfect and free from error. Every other book, we can always find improvements to it. So now we come to, so he's in Baghdad. But the problem in Baghdad is Harun al-Rashid has passed away. Al-Amin has come to power, and he reigned about, I think, 5-6 years. He's passed away, and now comes Al-Mamun. And Al-Mamun, of course, is now famous on the lips of everybody, just as Harun al-Rashid is now famous on the lips of everybody because of Arabian Nights. You know the Arabian Nights, the story of Ali Baba, and it's all about Harun al-Rashid and the glorious period. Well, Al-Mamun is famous on the lips of people because of the Inquisition he started. Yeah. He was, although there's dispute about whether he himself was, but he favoured very strongly the Mu'tazila view. Mu'tazila was a sect that came out during the time of Hasan al-Basri and quickly established themselves, having taken on the philosophical arguments of the Greeks. They established themselves, and Al-Mamun linked himself up with them, such that among their different things, the key for Al-Mamun and the Mu'tazila of his time was the view that the Quran was created by Allah. You see, Sunni Orthodox, and it's a very deep subject, it's a subject that you can get your mind completely confused about. It's a very deep subject. Sunni Orthodoxy had always believed, because Allah is eternal, there is no start or end of Allah. So that means Allah's attributes are eternal. So for example, Allah's speech is eternal. The kalam of Allah is eternal. So Sunni Orthodoxy believed the Quran, being Allah's speech, is eternal. It didn't have a start or an end. Whereas the Mu'tazila believed, no, it has a start. It's created. Now it sounds a subtle point, but Al-Mamun did the unthinkable. He issued this statement that the Quran, Al-Quran, Kalamullah, Al-Makhluq, the created, to be stamped on most of the mosques of his empire at that time, especially Iraq, and every scholar had to swear to it to be allowed to continue. And of course, I mean, this is after Imam Shaf'i, just a bit after, the poor young scholar who now matured towards the end of Imam Shafi'i's life, Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal, and you read about his torture that he endured because he said, no, I will not accept this. I will not accept this. I do not believe this. And he was put into prison and tortured. Imam Shafi'i, realizing now in Baghdad that the atmosphere has changed, intolerance is in. Before, no Khalifa would have dared say, this is the view and anyone who disagrees with this is in jail. This is intolerance. And now he realized the atmosphere changed. Imam Shafi'i left Baghdad and went to Egypt. Why Egypt? Because Egypt, for many reasons, we don't know for sure, but Egypt was not affected by the mihna, this inquisition, this intolerance. So he went to Egypt, and in Egypt he settled and he lived for 5 years until his death, and that's where he refined this book, put it as one volume, introductory chapter eventually of his big magnus opus, as it were, Kitab al is his final legacy of the different fiqh opinions, but it begins with a theory of usul al-fiqh. And there he passed away. He passed away in 204 after Hijri at the age of 54 years old. And his grave, I went to visit his grave only 4 years ago, 3 years ago. And his grave is in Al-Fustat in Cairo. And that's where he, what's interesting is when he arrived in Cairo, most of Egypt was Maliki. And yet within a century of him, most of Egypt was Shaf'i, and then later on, of course, Hanbali when the Ottomans came in. So it's quite interesting how the evolution of the madhab developed there. Okay, now I'll just go through a few stories about him. One man came to Imam Shaf'i and he asked him a question. He said, "Oh Imam, I want to ask you a question. This is the issue." Then the man who was questioning, asking the question, said, "And about this, the Prophet ﷺ said this, this, and this. What is your view, O Imam?" And Imam Shaf'i said, "What corner of the world or sky would protect me if I reported what the Prophet ﷺ said and then gave a different view?" You've already given me the hadith on this, and now you say, "What is my view?" How? No chance. So that's what the Prophet ﷺ said, and that's the view. And then he said something else which is so beautiful. I really love this statement of his. He said, "I wish people would learn what I have to give," because he recognized people would flock around him. There wasn't anywhere he could go towards the latter end of his life without crowds, because he was so famous by now. A young Imam, but so knowledgeable, so full of understanding. So he recognized people would come. And he said, "I wish people would learn what I have to give without it being attributed to me. In this way, I would gain the reward from Allah without hearing the praise of people." So he said, "I wish I could tell people what I've got to give and they don't realize I've given it to them. Because then I don't have to hear the praise of people when they receive it." And of course the famous Shaf'i scholar whose grave I also visited about 5-6 years ago actually, absolute genius of a scholar, Imam Nawawi, and whose grave actually was bombed this about 5 months ago. And out of Imam Nawawi's grave is a big tree comes out of his grave, and that tree has been, the whole roof's collapsed off somebody bombed it during this period of trials we've got. Imam Nawawi wrote about Imam Shaf'i that he would always go around with a walking stick. And they said, "You're a young man, why do you carry a stick?" And he said, "It's to remind me that I'm just a traveller in this world. So I can keep that we all have to leave, we have to all go to Allah in the end." Okay, now, there are 2-3 important things that I want to get across before I go to the actual lessons we can learn. The first is that he combated a very important Mu'tazili argument. Mu'tazilis said, we will only accept a hadith. Quran, of course, they accepted. They said, we will only accept a hadith if it has 2 or more narrations, riwayah. Because we will not accept ahad hadith to make hukm. One chain, even though it's authentic, it's one Sahaba who said it, and therefore we won't accept it. It's one Sahaba who reported it from the Prophet ﷺ. We won't accept it. Why not? Because in the Quran we're told about having 2 witnesses. So they use this argument. Now this was a crucial moment, and Imam Shaf'i, he just absolutely annihilated this argument. So you don't hear it now, because they realize the utter weakness of his argument. And I believe had he not been there to crush this would have gained ground more. And he said, if this was the case, that we needed 2 witnesses for everything to be true, then why is it, and then he gave 2 or 3 scenarios, from the time of the Prophet ﷺ, why is it that one day the Prophet ﷺ sent one man, one Sahaba, the Prophet ﷺ had received wahi revelation that the Qibla had changed. And you go into the mosque where the Qibla changed. Yeah, you know the story. Qibla changed from Jerusalem to the Kaaba. When the Qibla changed, when the reverses came, and of course immediately they changed the Qibla, the direction. As soon as the prayer was over, the Prophet ﷺ sent one man. He said, go around to the tribes and tell them that the direction of prayer has changed to this. Imam Shaf'i said, no one said, oh, there's only one of you. No one said, sorry, we're not accepting that. We need 2 witnesses. They changed their direction of prayer based on one person's evidence. So again, very good analogy. And the same, of course, when alcohol became forbidden. There's a hadith in Bukhari, when the verse came of the Quran, which said, alcohol and gambling are the handiworks of shaitan. And from now on, alcohol was forbidden. The Prophet ﷺ sent one Sahaba to go around shouting in the streets of Medina that alcohol is forbidden. And that's famous hadith, because it says, and at it people would start throwing their wine, so that the sewers, if you like, the streets of Medina ran with wine. So they threw them away. Later on, we had some debaucherous poets in our time, centuries later, who used to get drunk and do poetry, and one of them would recite, I wish I had been drinking from the sewers of Medina at that time, because I'd have got drunk, because so much alcohol was. So it's a very famous hadith in Bukhari. But again, Imam Shaf'i narrates, one Sahaba was sent. No one said, we're not listening to a haram, halal, hukm based on one. So he smashed that. The other interesting thing that he did was he fought against the slow development of the Shia. It was just beginning, this idea of the infallibility of the Imams. And again, he fought against this, because the only one is infallible, and that is the Prophet ﷺ. So he argued against that whole thing. Now we come to some lessons, and I've picked out 6 important lessons that I think are key. And the first is his open-hearted humility. You know, when you have 2 people debating with each other on a specific issue, what gets in the way of truth is ego. So you have somebody saying, no, this is correct, and here's my dalil, here's my evidence. No, this is correct, and here's my evidence. And some people might get swayed because they feel, oh, I can't back down to him, who is he? Or, I don't want others to think that I don't know my stuff, so I'll remain. So ego comes into it. That's not Imam Shaf'i. What you learn from him is a humility to change opinion whenever truth emerges. So you have accounts of him saying, very early on, saying that's true. And so he's absolutely, he's got no problem with accepting truth from wherever it is found. And I found that fascinating. It's a very rare thing to find. Number 2, of course, how many people do you know who went, I mean, look at this scholar, studied in Makkah, not satisfied, took every single thing he could from Makkah, not satisfied, went to Medina. Stayed with the scholar of his time in Medina until the person passed away, and then went to Yemen, went to Iraq, went back to Makkah, went to Iraq again. He's after seeking knowledge wherever he can find it. And that's something, you know, if I could wind the clock back, I wish I could have done. I haven't done. I was more interested in, okay, what's next in my sort of life? Okay, I've got to get a house, got to get married. I wish I'd been more single-minded in looking at who's alive at the time in the world and going to sit down, go over there, find out what to do, trying to learn and build my knowledge base up. Very important. And he did that at a very, very early age. That's number 2. Never-ending thirst for knowledge. And number 3, you know, they referred to him, to Imam Shaf'i, Al-Qadim or Qadim, and Al-Jadid, the old and the new. Because they say, oh, the Imam Shaf'i of Iraq and the Imam Shaf'i of Cairo. 2 different Imam Shafi'is, because they have different fatwa there, and he had a different changes fatwa when he came to Cairo. So much so they think the difference between the two, some scholars said it's up to 60%, others said 40%. So he went from Baghdad, he gave fatwa on certain matters, went to Egypt 6-7 years later, and they asked him the same question and he gave different fatwas. He changed his mind. Why? Because of different circumstances he found in Egypt. Because he understood things differently. And so I asked this to one of our Hanafi muftis about 8 years ago. I booked a session with a big Hanafi mufti in this country. And I said, do you accept that Imam Shaf'i, may Allah be pleased with him, left Baghdad, went to Cairo and changed, if we accept the least amount, changed 40% of his fatwas? He goes, yes. And I said, and what lessons do we draw from that? He said, the lesson is that fatwa must look at the circumstances of the people. And the circumstances of people were different in Cairo than they were in Baghdad, and so he changed. I said, have he changed up to 40%? He goes, yes. And I said, is that a good thing? He goes, it's a thing that every mufti must do. So I said, Mufti Sahib, then can I ask? He went from Arab Baghdad to Arab Cairo, from Baghdad under the Khalifa to Cairo under the Khalifa, from Muslim Baghdad to Muslim Cairo, and he changed 40% of his rules. You've come from Muslim Pakistan to a non-Muslim UK, from an area of Indian subcontinent and its customs to an area of English and mixed Muslim community. Can I ask what percentage of your fatwas have you changed? And he started laughing. He said, I will not give you an answer to that question. But that's the issue for me. You see, Imam Shaf'i was very flexible. And maybe this mufti feels that if he changed his fatwa, maybe the community would go against him. I don't know, Allah knows best. But certainly a lot of our fuqaha have not looked at the atmosphere we're in today to see what allows itself to be changed and what does not. Number 4, he brought two things together, Ahl al-Rai and Ahl al-Hadith, and he joined them together. And I think that's very powerful. And why do I say that? Because that's what's happening today. We have strands of people today. People who are not imbued in Islamic sciences at all, saying whatever rationally comes to their mind. No, brother, it's like this. Well, how do you know? And yet at the same time, in opposition to them, we have people saying, the hadith says this and this is it. No movement. No understanding of the context of hadith, where, how, and so on. And Imam Shaf'i, he merged the two together, and that's very, very powerful. Number 5, and I think number 5 is another big key. You see, fuqaha, jurists, do not use hadith alone. And there's a very powerful statement by one of the big hadith collectors, Sufyan ibn Uyayna, who Imam Shaf'i learned from. Sufyan ibn Uyayna said, hadith is a source for misguidance except for jurists. So hadith is a source for misguidance except for jurists. Because you will find people pick up Bukhari and they say, you've got to follow this. Not understanding when a hadith was said, why it was said, etc. And I remember being on a course with Professor Mahmoud Abu Saud many, many years ago. May Allah bless him. He was a great man. He was 80 years old. He did a course on politics in Islam for young Muslims in London in about 1993-94. And I attended that course. And it was a week-long course done at Forces headquarters. And we were there sitting there learning. And there was one brother who stood up and he said to him, Shaykh, you're wrong. The hadith says this. So Professor Mahmoud said, Sheikh, you're wrong, the hadith says this. Prophet Muhammad said to him, do you follow every hadith? He goes, yes. He goes, but do you not look at the context of the hadith? The hadith you quoted has a particular context. And before he could carry on, the young man said, I don't want to know about context and this and that. The Prophet ﷺ has said something and you're telling me different. So Muhammad Abu Sa'id quickly said, so you don't want to follow the Prophet. So you only want to follow the words of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. He goes, yes, without question. He goes, yes. So get me Muslim. So he was a bit angry, so somebody got him Muslim, so he turned the page and said, right, follow this. The Prophet ﷺ said, O Muslim, do not drink water. You don't follow it now. So the man went back, he goes, now you want to know, well, why did he say that? How did he say that? Under what context did he say that? And that's what I'm saying to you, young man. Do not follow hadith blindly just like that. You need to know the story behind them, you need to know the context, whether it's applicable, not, and so on. It's a very important point. And lastly, the respect Imam Shaf'i gave to other scholars. Do you know, even in his book, Khilaf Malik, he did not write the words, and on this issue Malik was wrong. He did not. He was very careful how he expressed difference. So beautifully. Not once did he ever rubbish an argument. Not once did he disrespect any of the scholars that he spoke out against. He gave his view and he said in a very polite manner, this is why I think that your argument does not hold water, or this is why I think this argument is stronger. And if you want to know adab, that was his adab. It's beautiful adab. And that, I think, is such an important point to learn. Because we live at a time when we have the intolerance of the conservatives who believe this is the way and there is no other way. And then on the other side we have the intolerance of the liberals who will say, no, it's only this and nothing else. And we have to go back to his way, which is, all different views are there. We learn, we learn of each other, but we don't negate and disavow and be rude to each other. Just finally, his legacy, Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal, whom he had a discussion with, of course, gave the hadith, which is narrated in Al-Hakim, where the Prophet ﷺ said, every century Allah sends a mujaddid, a renewer. Actually, some people, when we did that hadith, we were told actually that it could be translated as every generation as opposed to century. So every generation Allah sends a renewer. And Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal, whom Imam Shaf'i disputed with, so his own, if you like, to some degree, rival, but who had such great respect for him, Imam Ahmad said, and the mujaddid of this century is Imam Shaf'i, in his view. And Imam Shirazi spread his madhab in Iraq. Juwayni, the great, the Imam of Al-Haramain, he was a Shafi, spread his madhab there. And we have Sultan Salahuddin Ayyubi, when he came, at that time Egypt became more Shafi, and to this day, of course, as you know, by the Qanun, the Imam of Al-Azhar is always a Shafi because of Imam Salahuddin Ayyubi's time. Somalia, Ethiopia, Eastern Egypt, all of Malaysia, Indonesia, and I don't know if you know, we have some prison Imams who are from India, and they've got a long heritage of Shafi community there. I didn't know that. So that's his Imam Bayhaqi, Nishapuri, Jalaluddin Suyuti, Dhahabi, the great Imam Ghazali, Ibn Hajar Asqalani, Ibn Kathir. These are all Shafis. And what are the madhab differences? Imam Shafi said he was the person who coined, which it took me a while to understand, a long while. He coined the phrase bid'ah hasana because he took it from the hadith. And he made it clear that actually no, all bid'ah is not wrong. There are bid'ah which is good, bid'ah which is mustahab, bid'ah which is, and so on. He put them into that category. Here, the other view that we disagree with some of the Hanafis disagree with the Malikis, with the Shafis, of course. Imam Shaf'i is famous for translating the verse to mean that touching a woman for a man breaks his wudu. So again, that's famous in the Shaf'i madhab. So if you're there in a bus or something, and you on your way to the Jummah prayer or whatever, to a prayer, you accidentally or you get hold of somebody and it's a ghair mahram woman, you touch her, the wudu breaks. The Hanafis translated, Imam Abu Hanifa, they translated that verse to say no, it means sexual intimacy, not touch. The Malikis translated it to say no, it means touch with pleasure. So three different interpretations. A good verse to do ikhtilaf of the madhabs, to understand the differences. Imam Shafi, of course, the Shafi madhab also believes that feet of a woman is aura. So if you ever go to Umrah or Hajj, you go to Far East, you'll see Muslim women would normally have socks on, whereas you don't see that in the Turkish and the Arab world, because they believe that. The other view that's different is that the Shafis believe that the dry dog is najas. So you have a dog and you touch a dog, even if it's dry, they believe it's najas, it's impure. So you have to take your clothes, wash them, etc. Whereas the Hanafis believe it's the wet dog, or the wetness of the dog, or the saliva of the dog. The Malikis, of course, believe, no, it's nothing. All dog is pure.
The heat.
That's why the famous Imam, the Guy Eaton, who's brilliant guy. Guy Eaton, who passed away last year, I think.
2 years ago.
When he came to visit me once, and I said to him, why are you Maliki when you converted? He said, because I could keep my dogs. Because Malikis say dogs are clean.
Okay.
He, of course, Imam Shafi said about witr. Witr in the Shafi madhab is sunnah, not wajib. So wajib is a category for the Hanafis. So for them it's sunnah. The other famous one, which I'm dealing with actually in a question at the moment, is the Shafis believe that the permission of the father as the wali for a woman to get married is wajib. So they believe no Muslim woman who is not married, not divorced, so she's never married, no Muslim woman can marry except with her father's permission. Whereas the Hanafis are more lenient. The Hanafis say that no, she can if the reason for the father to say no is not Islamic. Then the Imam who's carrying out can act as the wali. Different disputes. So at the moment I'm dealing with a case where it's a Shafi girl who wants to marry this Pakistani Muslim guy, and his mother and father are happy with it, but her father is unhappy with it. So where do we stand here? Because she can't marry because her father's position is Shafi, but he can, and so on. And lastly, of course, a big issue. People didn't realize. People thought, oh, it's just modernism. It's not. It's a very old fatwa of the Shafi madhab that the tasmiyah, saying Bismillah, when you do the dhabiha of an animal, in the Shafi madhab it's sunnah. In the Hanafi madhab it's wajib or rukn. So for a Hanafi, you take an animal, you must say Bismillah before it's halal. For a Shafi, you don't have to. So you just slaughter, it's halal. Because they believe, no, it's in the heart, you don't have to utter it. So it's because it's a sunnah. If you do it, good. If you don't do it, no problem. Now this is very important because both Hanafis and Shafis accept that you can eat the meat of the Ahlul Kitab. It's a Quranic ayah. But the Hanafis say, well, we can eat the meat of the Jews and Christians, it's not a problem. And so I can nip into Asda's and have the meat. But no, I can't because they haven't said the tasmiyah. So have they said the tasmiyah? No, they haven't. I can't eat it. It's haram. The Shafis say, well, actually it's sunnah. Whether they've said it or not, I can eat it. So this is the root of that big thing. So when I was learning hadith, and we had a long time ago, this scholar was teaching us hadith, and we sit there, and one day we came to this topic. I was sitting there, and we were eating this chicken sort of rice. And I said, about this issue, I mean, the Shafi, because yeah, I think the Shafi's view is stronger. Tasmiyah is not necessary. I said, but that means then that the chicken, according to you, in Asda's and Tesco's is halal. He goes, yeah, what do you think you're eating? So here, this is the beauty of the ikhtilaf of our ummah. May Allah constantly guide us to seeking knowledge and to learning and constantly learning the beauty of His deen. Amen.